Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is an exclusive and from the archives of the channel, and I'm pretty sure some of you have missed this one among the collection of stories on the channel. A quick note from the author before we get into things. This story is an adaptation of an old family story written by his great-great-grandfather. He turned to writing after fighting in the First World War, and this particular story of his is based on what he never published in a local bookstore. He doesn't know the details because only his granddad is alive now, but the house was hit in the Second World War Blitz and all of his unpublished stories were lost. And so the author had to work with his granddad to see what he could remember being told as a boy in the evening, getting his granddad to tell him the story. And with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Hunters Guild. Entry: The Roman Werewolf. Let's get straight into that. On a chilly autumn's morning, a Roman soldier was eager to return home after many years of war. On his journey, he came across the ancient woodland that lay before his home. A feeling of joy hit him as the charm of the woods enticed him to pass through. The first day of the journey had proven to be delightful, as the soldier was seemingly captivated by the sound of birds singing in the canopy that sat just above the endless columns of pine trees. As the short hours of sunlight faded and the chill of autumn breeze creeped in, the soldier deemed it time to settle down for the night. After finding a large moss-covered tree, he set up his bedroll and built a small fire as he gathered the ration food he had assigned for that evening. And partway through the night, the soldier was woken up by soft sobbing in the distance. He gingerly reached for his sword, but after a few minutes, the sobbing slowly wisped away from his camp, until he could no longer hear it. And for the rest of the night, he slept with one eye open. The next morning, after a troubled night's sleep, the soldier awoke with a higher level of intent and desire to put distance between himself and, well, whatever he had heard. As the day went on, it began raining heavily, and so the soldier, comfortable with the distance he had made, built himself a shelter for the evening. It took him a little longer to find rest with the thoughts of the previous night in mind, but eventually he dozed into a quiet sleep. His rest was short-lived, as what seemed like moments later, he awoke to a sobbing that sounded like it was right outside his camp. In a rush of fear, the soldier grabbed his sword and crawled out of his shelter to find the back of a ragged woman sitting beside the fire, and with her head drooped into her hands. The soldier, realizing his mistake, asked her what was wrong, but to no answer. He began to slowly approach. He reached out to grab her shoulder when she turned around. Her chin was dripping with blood, and as the glow from the fire lit her face, her hand clutched a reminiscence of a partially eaten arm. The soldier was horrified, and he began to stumble. "Run," she muttered. "Please, please run." And as she spoke, she revealed a set of jagged teeth. But before he could reply, she slipped back into the darkness. Well, the soldier turned and took off into the night, with just his sword in hand. He ran until his lungs burned and his feet hounded with pain. But as the first light of dawn starred the horizon, he found himself stumbling down the path again. The third day was bright and calm, but the soldier, rattled and sleepless, failed to notice the beauty he had previously admired. He moved as fast as he could, trying to get through the forest before nightfall, but to no avail as darkness began to fall once more. And turning down a beaten old path that led off the road, he spotted an old, moss-covered cabin. Assuring himself that it would be a good place to bunker down for the night, the soldier climbed the old steps to the cabin door. After surveying the cabin, he spent the last few moments of daylight blocking the doors and the windows with what was left of the furnishings, so that nothing could get in. And despite his preparations, he could not sleep. He sat in what used to be the cabin's bedroom, staring at the barricaded door and nervously tapping his blade. Eventually, he couldn't keep his eyes open any longer and fell asleep. This time he awoke to a pungent stench of urine and putrefying blood, followed by a deep, predatory growl from the other side of the barricaded room. His thoughts turned to the woman from the previous nights, but he refused to believe it was her. Knowing he would be trapped, the soldier burst through the door to find the ragged woman had become a monstrous creature, coated with a thick layer of long, dark, wiry hair and muscular, elongated limbs. Its head resembled a wolf's, but with a shorter, disfigured snout and jaw. The creature had a damp, musty look, as if a dog had just come in from the rain. Terrified by what stood before him, and with no way of escaping, he began to recklessly swing his sword, but the cuts from the steel were gone instantaneously, as if from magic. His persistence only proved to anger the beast further. The soldier lunged at the monster, but his weapon was ripped from his hand before he could strike. With no way to defend himself, and the beast closing in on him, he made a last-ditch attempt as he ripped his silver brooch that pinned his cape and plunged it into the creature's side, drawing an agonizing scream of pain from the monster, who proceeded to leap through the tattered window of the cabin, disappearing into the night. Well, the ordeal was over. The ragged creature was gone. The soldier did not sleep that night, and the next day he pushed his exhausted body through the woods. And as the sun began to set, he reached the edge of the forest to see the faint clouds of smoke rising from his farmhouse in the valley below. The wild flowers growing along the border of the forest were swaying in the chilling breeze. The hint of frost lingered with intention. The soldier knew that this autumn it would be a cold one. Night settled over the first month at home. The soldier was on his way to check his livestock for the night. As he got to the end of his path, he saw what appeared to be his ram. His peaceful mind quickly turned to a shock as he saw that his ram was missing its head. At that moment, the smell of putrid blood and a gust of warm, stagnant breath came from behind his ear. His body froze. He shuddered, his legs feeling weak under his weight. He managed to turn his body to face the beast, and he was only able to utter a handful of whims. No, before he could finish. The beast ripped into his chest with a shattering blow from its claws. The soldier hit the ground with a harsh thud. He lay there, helpless, as the werewolf set upon his throat, ripping at his body as it shook him, and eventually the soldier's face flowed with blood, and his straining eyes went glossy and cold. The beast lifted from his corpse with what remained of the man's neck and its blooded mouth. That night, the werewolf savaged the soldier's family. It battered down the farmhouse door and slaughtered his wife and 14-year-old boy. Only his youngest son of 10, who hid amongst the rafters, was able to survive. When morning came, 2 traders from the nearest settlement, who had been returning home, came across a pen of slaughtered sheep. And as they rode up to the paddock border, the mangled body of the soldier had been dragged across the pathway. His guts were splayed and his arms and legs were severed. "That's Marius," said the first man as he dismounted, tying his mare to the paddock fence. "Father said he only returned 1 month past," replied the other, as he too hitched his horse. The 2 traders looked at each other as they wearily continued towards the cottage. They were met with what remained of the soldier's family, and the boy who had hid, who was now sitting in the far corner, clutching to his father's sword. "Hey," spoke one of the men as he got down on one knee. "It's all right. Tell me what happened." "It's okay. Whatever it was, it's gone now." "You can come with us. We'll take it to your family," the man standing uttered. "Who, Atticus? His family are in pieces." "Silence. You are not helping," replied the first man. "I'm just saying." "Well, don't." "Where can we take him, then? He can't stay at the Oak Hill with us." "I know," uttered the first farmhand, "but we must take him somewhere." Then the man turned back to the frightened boy. "Hey," he spoke softly, "have you got an uncle or an aunt, or are they far?" The boy slowly but surely nodded. "You see, he has family." "Yes, okay. Just hurry up and get him. We have to get home to father before nightfall," replied the second man. The first man leaned towards the young boy. "We're going to take you to our father." "Atticus!" "No, father will want to see him, and besides, we don't know where his family reside." and the man turned back to the frightened boy. We need to get you to our father's estate. You'll be safe there. Once we have daylight again, we can begin taking you to your uncle, okay? The boy replied with another nod. My name is Marcus, but father called me Marco, spoke the boy. All right then, Marco. I'm Atticus, and this is my brother, Lucius, proclaimed the first man. Put down the sword and let's go. Marco slid back hard against the wall, gripping the sword tighter. Okay, responded Atticus, his tone softening. You can bring the sword. Wait, I need to find some things first. Okay then, said Atticus, as he rose to his feet. We will give you a moment to gather your belongings. Lucius stepped to his brother and with a whisper told him. What did we tell him? What if he asks? What if he saw it? You know what father said. It comes after whoever survives, and there's still 2 nights of the full moon. Look, we said we'd get him to his uncle. Until then, we have to do right by him, replied Atticus in a calm tone. And he continued. Father always spoke well of Marius, said he was a veteran in the Legion. How it would be ill in the eyes of the gods to lead this boy to the terrible fate this family has suffered. I can't find it, murmured Marco as he returned to the 2 brothers. And the 3 returned to the horses where the boy suddenly fell to his knees at the sight of his dismembered father. Lucius stopped and looked back at the scruffy, sobbing child. Come, Marco, we need to get you back before the sun sets. And Marco struggled to his feet, still holding his father's gladius. He ran over to the mangled body, snatching at something amongst the tattered and blood-soaked clothes. We need to make haste, Marco. Our father will want to see you before our evening meal. I'm ready, the boy said. When they made it to the farmstead, the red autumn sun slid back over the windswept horizon, giving way to a cold glow of the full moon. The 3 dismounted, and Marco could see that the farm was no farm, but an extensive village, with at least 60 residents. There was market stalls leading up the main road, various other shops dotted around the edge of the tall stone and wooden beam wall. At the base of this wall, violet flowers swayed in a cold breeze. The main estate was at the very top of the hill, and was crowned with what was quite an impressive old oak tree. Servants came over immediately and took the steeds back to their stables, and Marco watched as one by one the other workers and the local peasants stared at him, only to hurry back to their homes. And Marco was confused, and in his head he was trying to understand why everyone was looking at him. Was it the dry blood on his clothes? And then, as soon as his mind wandered, he was snapped back by the voice of Lucius. This way, Marco. My father will be expecting us. The 2 men escorted the boy to the estate courtyard, where there sat an older man. His short but shaped beard was grey, and his receding hair was nonetheless plush and well-groomed. He was entertaining himself with a book entitled The Conquest of Britannia. Father. A warm smile drew across the elder man's face as he withdrew from his reading. Aha! My son's return. Have we made any progress with the Merchants' Guild in Rogerverne? He then sat his gaze upon the young boy. And who's this young man you've brought to me? Come now, what is your name, son? We found him on the return. His is... yes, Marcus, youngest son of Marius. You were only this tall when I last saw you, gesturing with his hand to a considerably shorter height. Perhaps you remember me. My name is Magnus. Your father served under me many years ago in the Legion, and I see you have met my sons, Atticus and Lucius. And the boy nodded his head in agreement. But enough reminiscing. You must be hungry and in need of new clothes. He turned to the housemaid, who was patiently waiting several yards behind him. Come, take young Marcus and bath him. Find some of my son's old clothes that will suffice and bring him to the dining room. And with a nod of her head and a small respectful bow, the maid led the young boy back into the household. Once the maid and Marcus were out of earshot, the warm smile turned to a stern expression of cold waiting, much like that of a general receiving battle reports. What did you find, Atticus? His voice was calm and void of emotion. We were on our way back from Rogerverne when we passed Marius's farmstead. The wolf must have come down from the forest and all his stock was butchered. And Marius, what of him? Lucius took a step forward. Everyone was killed, father. We found what was left of Marius strewn across the pathway. The bodies of his wife and eldest boy were found inside the house. And that is also where we found young Marcus. He had this." Lucius held out the sword Marco had refused to let go of, until Lucius protested to being stabbed in the back whenever the horse began to trot. "Ah, yes," replied Magnus, reaching out to take the sword. "A centurion's gladius, a fine weapon, the very one I presented to Marius after he led his men and took back Hadrian's wall. I'm glad to see he brought it home from service." He pondered for a moment, his weathered hands becoming young again as they perfectly demonstrated how to grasp such a weapon. "But how does a boy, barely old enough to swing such a sword, survive whilst his entire family were murdered?" He said he hid in the rafters. "Ah, shame. Marius came to see me not 3 weeks ago. He told me of the creature in the forest. He said its flesh burned at the touch of his silver cloakpin, the scream it made. He said as soon as he had stabbed the creature, it immediately looked drained and only just managed to flee him. He believed it had died shortly after." The old man sighed. "Ah, Marius was brave and he always followed his orders. He was an exemplary soldier, but he was a fool to believe his family would be safe in that valley. I pleaded with him to bring them here in the safety of the walls. With his training and experience, he could have easily served as the captain of my watchmen. But he was adamant that his small farmhouse, it was all he needed. His family would have been under protection of our walls. Now it seems it would only be his son who will benefit from my grace." Atticus pondered for a moment before finally he spoke up. "Father, what of the boy? Surely he will be better with his uncle." "Agreed. I had no intention of taking him in. His uncle is the horse breeder that supplies our riding mounts. His farm is but a few days north from here." Atticus was gazing up upon the full moon sat high over the hills. Its cold glare pierced the shadows of the autumn night. A gust of wind stalked the courtyard, herding dried leaves as they circled the base of the old tree. "Are we both to take the boy?" inquired Atticus, his eyes returning to their conversation. "You both found him. You both have a duty to return him to his family," stated the old man. His words brought a sense of resolve that lightened his expression. But this was not for long, as riding on the back of the wind, it came. From the deep, dark distance, a bone-trembling guttural howl echoed throughout the cold abyss. "When, father?" The old man's eyes were fixed on the cold darkness. "You will both take him in 2 days' time." The Hunters Guild. Entry: The Roman Werewolf. Part 2. Let's get straight into that. 6 years later. "Hey Marco, are you in here?" "I'm up here, Remus. Give me a hand with this." Remus was standing outside the open doors of a tall wooden hay barn that stood behind 2 old pine trees. "Give me a hand with this hay. Uncle wants the horse fed before evening meal." A young girl, no more than 14, with long blonde hair, came running over to the barn entrance. "Remus! Remus!" shouted the little girl as her running changed to a brisk skip. "Yes," Remus replied. "What is it, Cecilia?" The blonde-haired girl finally slowed to a stop as she reached the large red doors. "Nothing, I'm just out picking herbs to dry. Father said it's going to be the coldest autumn in 6 years. He said snow might even cover the hills. Mum said that it would be so cold that all the flowers and herbs will die from the frost. Where is Marco? Can you help me hang them in here?" Marco looked down. "I'm up here, Cecilia. Wait, I'll jump down." Marco stepped towards the edge of the upper level, and just as he was preparing to make his leap down, wham! Marco slipped backwards. A clump of hay sprayed into the air in front of him. Marco's head connected with a harsh thud against the wooden floorboards, and everything went dark. In the darkness, the faint voice of a young girl called out, "Marco? Marco!" And the voice became deeper as it grew with clarity. "Marco! Marco! Wake up!" Lucius was kneeling down next to the boy, gently shaking him. "We need to get back on the road. We should be nearing your uncle's property by sundown." Marco rose from his makeshift bed, still sleepy-eyed, due to the uncomfortable roadside night. "Here, eat this." Atticus, who was going through his travel bag, extended his hand to Marco and presented the boy with half a bread roll. Marco was glad to see the dark brown doughy loaf, as the better nights on the road had left him with an extraordinary appetite. "How far do we have left?" muttered Marco as he stuffed the last mouthful of bread into his mouth. "It's over the next pass. As Lucius said, we should reach there by sunset." The three were up and ready to be in once more on the trail, when a piercing howl rang throughout the pine forest. Marco's face went pale white as he fell over backwards, scrambling to get away. Atticus reached down and pulled the boy to his feet. "Oh, it's coming! It's back! It's found me!" Lucius began to laugh at the frightened child and his erratic movements. "That was just a jackal. They're coming up here. Nothing to be afraid of." Atticus scowled at his younger brother, who in return stopped his chuckling almost instantaneously. "Lucius, get the horses saddled. We're moving on." Lucius huffed and began to saddle his horse, and he heaved the laden saddle over his mare. As he did, a large object wrapped in cloth came flying out from one of the satchels and hit the dirt with a puff of dust. The dagger was almost a foot long, and with a plain leather-wrapped handle, revealed as the cloth wrapped around the weapon had loosened. Marco looked at it with amazement. He immediately picked it up and held it in the light. The metal looked too pristine to be any iron tool, and as he held it higher, it shined with a dazzling brightness in the sunrise. "Wow, what's this made from? It's like a mirror." "Silver," replied Atticus. Marco stared at him with confusion and then back at the shining dagger. The girl's voice returned, this time a little less faint and more demanding. "Marco? Marco, wake up! Marco, wake up!" Images of the werewolf came flashing back to his mind. "Marco!" In his mind, the sound of his mother screaming, "Please, Marco!" The gurgling of blood as the wolf slashed his brother's neck came ringing into his ears. Marco woke up in his room. The sunlight was coming through the top of his window shutters. His head was in a bandage and throbbing painfully as it lay on a pillow that was damp with sweat. He slowly rose to a sitting position and looked over to the slim blonde girl with wavy hair who was clasping his hand. "Oh, Cecilia? Oh, by the gods! My head! What happened?" Cecilia began to break down in a splattering sob. "You fell off the hay barn." Tears were rolling down her cheeks. Her eyes were red, a sign that these were not her first she had shed that evening. "I did what?" mumbled Marco. A confused look ran over his face, and she began to sob harder. "Hey, don't be like that, Sally. I'm okay." "No, Marco." She slowly wiped her running nose with her sleeve. "That was 2 days ago." And with that, Cecilia fell onto him with a powerful embrace that caused her long blonde hair to smother Marco, who again fell onto his back. "You were talking in your sleep." She squeezed him even tighter. "Ouch! Careful, silly. What was I saying?" And she lifted over his chest and pushed her gold locks back over her shoulder. "Well," she murmured, before staring him straight in the eyes. "You sounded terrified. Like something was after you." Marco's face was grimaced with terror. He looked at his cousin's arm to see a red handprint covered her wrist. He struggled as a feeling of guilt clogged his dry throat. Did I do that to you?" he asked. "It's okay. I'm fine." The next evening, once Marco knew he would be alone, he slid under his bed and found a loose floorboard, and carefully lifting the board as not to make a sound, he reached under and pulled out a long object that was wrapped in a tattered cloth. He crawled out to the middle of his room and began to unwrap it, pausing to make sure he was truly alone. As the dust-covered cloth fell away, it revealed the leather-wrapped handle of the silver dagger. Marco was amazed at the discovery. He had completely forgot that only moments before he had been in a total panic over a jackal. Lucius stopped packing his mount and walked over to the boy. "This is not like a regular knife, Marco." "It's not thin and not particularly sharp," remarked Atticus as he rolled his blanket and tied it to his mount's saddle. Marco acknowledged him and continued looking at the dagger, then turned so that the sun would stop blinding him. The dagger was at Addict's side and was tapered to a point, but instead of two sharp edges, it was thicker and with a centre ridge that ran all the way to the point, and was indeed rounded at the edges. "Silver," proclaimed Atticus. "That's not as strong as iron. It can't hold a good cutting edge, and so a thrusting weapon is more effective. This shape stops the dagger from bending." "Well," replied Marco, "what's it for?" "It's for you, Marco," replied Lucius. "It's a parting gift from our father, but you must not let your uncle know about this. Some questions are better left unanswered." But what do I tell him about father and mother and—" "Listen, Marcus." Atticus knelt down next to the softly sobbing boy. "We planned to tell you this before we handed you off to your uncle. The reason we don't have any weapons is because the creature that attacked your family does not come up this far north. Do you see those flowers, Marco? Do you know what the violet heads are? Those are Achinoctum napellus. Most people call it monk's hood. We don't know why, but the wolf is never seen where those flowers are present. And more, the wolf is only seen during the autumn months. That's when the monk's hood blooms." Marco looked at him. His eyes were swelling, as tears cascaded down his cheeks. "Why are you calling it a wolf? It's not a wolf. I've seen wolves. A wolf will attack and kill a sheep or two. Can't rip a door clean off a house. It wasn't a wolf." "I'm sorry you saw that, Marco. That wolf, that thing, it stays in the southern forest because the soil is not rich enough to support wild flowers. That's why we're taking you here. It can't get to you while the monk's hood blooms." Marco's tear turned to confusion. Why would a monster like that be scared of flowers? "Come on, boy." Lucius mounted his mare and was reaching out a hand to the young boy. "We're only half a day's ride from your uncle, and I can't wait for a hot supper." "But wait," he cried. "Why give me a weapon if I'm safe in the north?" And they fell silent for a while, a silence that was broken by Lucius. "It's a precaution. Sometimes the winter's frost comes too early, and the frost covers the flowers, and they die before the autumn is over. Never forget, Marco. Beware if the frost should ever come while the oak trees are brown." While the three set off up the mountainside pass, Marco gazed out upon the rows and rows of fir, spruce, and pine trees that made up the hillside forest. The wild flowers sparkled from a dusting of frost that reflected in the morning sun. As they crested the mountain slopes, they came to a vantage point. In the distant lower ground, they saw a property, or more like two properties. A flat meadow clearing, and Atticus mentioned that it must be 20 acres or more, and with occasional pines or fir trees dotted among the open fields, but eventually it fell back to what was simply flat land forest. The entire scenery was separated only by an incredibly deep but nonetheless wide stone-bedded river that ran beside the mill house, and then as far as could be seen before disappearing into the trees. Marco could see that it wasn't just his uncle and aunt that lived here. "Your uncle has children, around your age, but I'm sure he will be overjoyed to have you, young Marco," said Atticus, ruffling the boy's hair. "The miller and his wife live in the mill house. It's only an acre or so away. From what I know, they all help each other, but a young man with muscles like yours, that will be a fine addition." Well, the first house, which was quite moderately sized for a family, sat at the front, and with several rows of stables that led to the main paddocks and grazing. Finally, towards the far side, almost 50 yards from the house, was a large red barn. There was a long dirt path that ran from the back of the property, veering off to the row of stables, and then to the red barn. The mill house was small, but not too small as to be inappropriate for a family. It sat further back along the stream. Atticus had been a little off with his prediction, as the distance was more like several acres. Running, pine trees, dead shriveled flowers covered in a blanket of snow, footprints, and then, finally, the fresh, open sky. A vantage point, a view from above, looking down over the darkness and the flickering lights of a homestead. A feeling of deep desire, hatred, and insatiable hunger. Oh, it filled Marco as he descended down the mountain path. The bright autumn moon sat high over the tree crests, its spherical visage like an eye, watching all that moves beneath it. Frosted grass cracked under Marco's feet. He was following an undeniably sweet smell that hung in the air. He crept forward and hid beside an old, moss-covered fir. His legs, powered by excitement, were tense. His mouth was dripping with anticipation. He sniffed at the air. His huge lungs expanded with a cold, crisp breeze, and again. And then turning his gaze upon the opening of the red barn doors, and skipping out from the doorway was a young teenage girl. Her golden hair glided over her soft shoulders, as she was leaving the barn in nothing but a nightdress. Marco's lips trembled as his hand scratched the tree limb he sat under. Desire beat him as he sprang into action. His powerful hind legs made quick work of the distance between them, and with a final push they launched him at the young girl. His claws impaled her as she was slammed into the dirt path. Her soft throat gave little resistance as he tore her open and was hit with the euphoria of hot steaming blood filling his mouth. He grunted with satisfaction as the last of her wiggling ceased. He lifted up her body with her neck still in his jaws, and she was still. No doubt the impact would have crushed her chest cavity. He leaned forward and urinated on the blood-soaked path. He then carried her crumpled body into the frosty darkness of the night. He awoke, and he was drenched in sweat, his cover sticking to him, despite the bitter cold wind that cut through every crack and every crevice in his wall. Marco was in a fury of rage and fear. Why was he having these dreams, and why now, after so long, of nothing? His life almost felt normal, but now he was terrified once more. I'm a grown man, 16 years old, he thought to himself as he sat up. Why is this happening? Why did it feel so real? He snapped over to see Remus had woken up from commotion. He looked at Sally, but her bed, it was empty. Remus, where is she? What? Where's who? Cecilia! Where's Cecilia? Remus sat from his bed. Marco, is this some stupid game? I'm really not interested, cousin. This is no game. She's in danger, you fool! Remus stared at his cousin. His tired expression quickly changed to one of fear and confusion. She said she was going to get you some herbs. You were having another nightmare. The worst one we've seen. She was worried, so she left to go get some dried herbs from the barn. What's wrong? Marco froze. He scrambled under his bed and popped the loose floorboard and snatched the silver dagger. Launching to his feet, he darted from the room and flew down the stairs to the back door of the house. The catch, was open, and the door was ajar. Oh no! Remus, the gladius in the dining room! Take it and get to the barn! Marco, what is going on? Marco turned and grabbed Remus by the collar of his shirt. His arms were trembling, but his grip was so powerful that any doubt Remus had that Marco was messing around, was extinguished. Just do it! The two boys slipped up. Marco jumped out of the open door and Remus scrambled for the gladius above the fireplace. The icy cold cut through Marco's clothes, and the bitter sting of the frozen ground was enough to be unpleasant, even through his leather boots. The wind was carrying snow, and it was becoming hard for him to see. Marco clasped the dagger tight, and he was almost halfway to the barn doors. The snow had ceased, and the wind still howled. Marco's vision cleared, and in front of him were small footprints. No doubt in his mind they belonged to Cecilia, and had led straight towards the barn doors. But as his vision sharpened, he could see to the left of him, just off the pathway, lay a set of large bipedal tracks. It was here, and it was stalking Cecilia. He knew what he had seen wasn't just a dream. It was a warning, an alarm call in his mind telling him that the beast, it was coming. His brain was jumbled with questions, struggling to grasp what was real and if this was just another dream. Why? He thought. Why again? Why now? How? How the fuck did it find me? Is there more than one? But there couldn't be. They can't pass through these woods. And then it hit him. It hit like he had been kicked in the chest by a stallion. The answer to why this was all happening. His expression went dead. His heart was frozen within his chest. His legs felt lifeless. It's the frost. Sally said that the frost would kill off all the herbs and the wildflowers. That means the monkshood would be dead. The only reason it couldn't cross these woods was dead. That thing, that Warson, it made its way through the mountain forest and has come for me. At that moment, something flipped in Marco's mind. It might have come for me, but it doesn't know I have this. He looked at his silver dagger. Its shining blade had snowflakes running down it. But he knew now that if it had come for him, he was going to have to give his all before he saw it kill his family. Not again, he said to himself, gritting his teeth. Not this time, you cunt. His heart raged in his chest, filling his body with adrenaline. Without a second thought, he began to run towards the barn, his heart beating like a hammer in his chest, and he could feel his lungs filled with a chilling air, all the whilst ignoring his numbing feet that came from the constant impact with a frozen dirt path. He was closing in on the large red barn when he heard the scream of his little cousin, closely followed by the sound of her soft body hitting the floorboard ground. He almost fell on the spot, no more than 10 yards from the doorway. He went cold, his heart sank like a stone in a deep well. All expression drained, leaving only despair in his eyes. I failed. I was too late and I failed. Glistening droplets were forming in his eyes as he gently took a step, and then another, and he was at the barn. The barn was only partially open, and Marco was now standing directly behind it. The large red door gently swayed in the wind. It was now the only thing standing between him and then the horror that was waiting inside. He took a deep breath, grasping his dagger tight, and took a step back and swung open a large red door, and then toppled over a stool. Dried herbs swaying, he took a step further. A blonde, 14-year-old girl came stumbling from the darkness of the barn. Her hands were rubbing her tummy as she revelled in her triumph. That was funny. I heard you scream. She giggled less as she read the expression on his face. I did fall off that stool. Oh, my back, she moaned. Marco's face flooded with a colour once more. Oh, Cecilia, I thought something terrible had happened. Cecilia looked up at him with an odd expression. What do you mean, silly? I slipped. Help me, Marco. I can't reach the herbs. I don't need any herbs, Sally. He helped her to her feet, and in one swift motion, the two embraced the other. She spoke with an ounce of pain. So, you're okay? I am, Sally. You shouldn't have come out here alone. It's not safe. She still had an odd expression of confusion. A slight panic began to drift into her eyes. Why, Marco? What's happened? Why are you acting so strange? She retracted her hand from his back when she felt the cold, metallic handle sticking from his fist. Come, we need to get you out of this place. It's really not safe. What? Come on! We can't stay here. Remus was standing in front of the fireplace. His hands were trembling. He had the gladius in his grasp, but the blade felt heavy, much heavier than he had expected. Crash! The sound of the roof being smashed through, and something huge was quickly followed by heavy footsteps, and the sound of screaming was quickly silenced by a deep, vibrating growl that made Remus's chest hum. He realized then that it wasn't the blade that was heavy. It was his arm that was weak with fear. His body trembling with fear and trembling with every fibre as he watched the drops of blood fall to his feet. Blood that was now seeping from the floorboards above his head. The floorboards of his parents' bedroom. He turned towards the door, but he froze on the spot as the loudest, spine-breaking howl that that made the entire house tremble rang out. Remus sobbed with terror. His trousers became wet as he pissed himself. The only thing that snapped him back to reality was the thought that his cousin and little sister were returning, and they had no idea there was a monster eating their parents. Remus did the only thing he could do at the time, and he stumbled out of the half-open door and began screaming. He could see Marco and Cecilia leaving a large red barn. "Turn back! Run!" And he was practically begging them. They spotted him and stopped, but he realized it wasn't him that they were staring at. They began to shout, and he was almost 30 feet from the house when he began to make out a few words. "Run! Just fucking run!" He stumbled down the pathway, turning back, and he cried in absolute horror. A pair of huge glowing yellow eyes were watching him from the rooftop. "Run, you idiot! Move your ass, you fool!" The werewolf watched Remus as he tripped and staggered, slipped, and finally began to pick up in desperate dash down the gritty, icy hard dirt path. The wolf pulled a crooked smile, as if the sight of a terrified 15-year-old boy, covered in his own piss and struggling to run, gave it the greatest satisfaction. A nightmarish howl followed by a thump as the creature leaped from the rooftop and landed on a frozen path. Remus was just over halfway from the barn when Marco turned to his little cousin. "We have to barricade the barn door. When Remus gets inside, we won't be able to get back to the house." They both turned and ran. Remus was now closing in, his hand still grasping the sword, but no matter how vigorously he ran, the deep, raspy exhale from the wolf was getting ever closer. Cecilia and Marco made it back to the large red barn door. She held it open while Marcus frantically searched for something to bar the door. He found it, a large timber beam, almost 10 yards in length. It was propped in a corner behind a pile of discarded, swept-up straw and an old rusted pitchfork with a crooked prong. "Yes," he said as he gripped it. The weight astonished him. He thought to himself, "If that can't hold the door, I don't know what will." He wrestled the wooden beam from its resting place. "Right, you hold open the door, and as soon as Remus gets inside, you pull it shut. Hey, did you hear me? Sally?" His eyes shot to the doorway. His cousin was screaming at Remus. "Run! Run, Remus! Run, it's gaining on you!" Remus was only 10 yards from the barn, and his cousin's cries fell silent upon him. All he could make out was the maw of the werewolf, open and slick with saliva. The stench of his parents' blood clung in a hot breath bellowing from the wolf's lungs. In those few moments, Remus put himself off from the world. All his mind could see was a ghastly visage, flickering images of his sister being torn to pieces, his cousin ramming a pitchfork deep into the beast, only to have his guts wrenched out with a swift upward strike. He wanted to get up and fight, but he couldn't. His body was gone. Only his spine was attached, a few strips of flesh draped along the floor. In that instant, Remus knew he would not allow that to happen. He was too far, and the wolf was right behind him. He knew what he had to do, and so he span. He span with the gladius in hand, preparing to strike. But he didn't. He slipped and stumbled backwards, fell and tumbled. The wolf leaped, claws splayed, jaw agape. Remus, only 15 feet from a large red doors, closed his eyes, and then nothing. The wolf didn't land on him. It didn't mangle his body. Instead, an old pitchfork with a crooked prong hurtled above his head when it struck its mark, and that mark was the werewolf's mouth. The prongs, although rusted, were sharp enough to cut the soft flesh of the werewolf's throat, and the creature howled, spun around and out of its intended trajectory, and slid to the edge of the path, whining, but not dead. Remus took this chance to scramble inside of the barn. "That was one hell of a throw, Marco," screamed Cecilia, heaving a huge red wooden door shut. Remus was panting. Miraculously, his hand was still clamped around the gladius. "Remus," cried Marco, "help me, the beam!" The two boys heaved and strained as they lifted the wooden bar into place, and just in time, as the entire front side of the barn shook with a force that caused dust to trickle from the beams and hay to fall from places that the three didn't think was possible for hay to fall from. The werewolf slammed against the huge red wooden doors. Sparks of wood were flying in every direction as the wolf struck the doors, over and over again. But these doors were not those of a simple farm cottage. They didn't budge. Razor-like claws of the werewolf dug in, and eventually one of the planks of the red doors gave way to a hideous hand that quickly retracted, leaving a head-sized hole on the door to which the moonlight burst through. Cecilia screamed in desperate panic. "It's getting through! Oh, Jesus! It's breaking down the door!" The wolf stopped its assault, growled hideously. The sound it made was full of rage, and then a large black mass with a huge yellow eye engulfed the opening in the door, and it stared at the two, huddled in a dark, musky barn. Cecilia, who was whimpering, pulled herself close to Remus and pressed the side of her face against his chest. She screamed. A huge disfigured arm covered in thick, wiry black fur flew through the hole. Its long, misshapen fingers adorned with huge, black talon-like claws were writhing in the open space as if tentacles that were trying to snatch at the terrified blonde girl. As if from nowhere, Marco dashed from the shadows and sliced at the wailing arm, with an inexperienced but nonetheless accurate and somewhat effective slice with a gladius. The beast gave a hollow cry, as this time he had severed several digits from the beast's hand. The arm drew back in a retreat, which was quickly followed by a venomous grumble and a harsh smack against the large barn doors. The digits that hit the dusty floor of the barn were clearly visible in a stream of moonlight that poured through the arm-sized hole. And the three of them looked on attentively as they began to twitch, and then more violently as they began to turn, shrinking into digits that resembled those of a woman. The three stared on at the severed fingers with astonishment, but this was not for long, as an ear-splitting screech came from Cecilia. "Ah!" The moonlight was suddenly blocked by a huge dark figure, and two huge yellow orbs stared at them from the frost-bitten night. The drooling gape turned into a sinister grin. The wolf raised its hand, and to the disbelief of the trio, the hand had 5 fingers. The beast stared at them with malice and vile intent, only it wasn't the three that the wolf was watching. It was Marco. He fell to his knees, dropping the sword and grasping his temples with agony. A wretched, deep gargle of a voice echoed through his mind.
You, I have smelt before. You, who I have so longingly wished to devour. You, whom have evaded my reach, till now."
The werewolf began to circle the barn, growling and hissing as it did so. Marco was still on his knees, but barely. He began to scream out in pain and anger. His nails by now began to dig into the skin. The beast continued.
"You who bears the sign, the one who had foreseen my coming, I shall bring you death. I shall rip you, tear you. I shall feel your muscles clench and your bones splinter. And before this, I will force you to watch as I feed on them."
"No!" he cried. "Never! I'll kill you! You won't touch them, you bastard!" The beast roared with utter intimidation and rage.
You shall watch, as you did before."
"Never!" Marco slammed his fist into the hard ground of the hay barn. A cloud of dust rose in the air, and small fragments of grit showered down around them. Marco felt strange, as if sparks of electricity were pinging between his fingers. He looked down to check, but alas, there was nothing, and all went silent for a few moments. Marco's shoulder began to burn with a searing light. "By the gods, Marco, what the hell was that about?" stammered Remus, plucking straw and grit from his hair. It was nothing. You stay here. Keep Sally safe." "No!" proclaimed the little girl. "You can't go out there alone. The beast is out there. You saw what it did to the door. It will kill you, goddammit!" Marco, he didn't react. He went to the barn door, stopped and listened attentively. The wolf was nowhere to be heard. He twisted his shoulders and looked back at the two. "You make sure to bar the doors behind me. Don't come out unless I call you. If I don't, then, well, stay here till morning. Take 2 horses and ride south. You'll find a village called Oak Hill."
"Marco,"
whimpered Cecilia. "Please, do as I ask. It wants me, not you. I have to end this. If I don't, it will kill us all," he said before he turned back and took the last few paces to the barn door. The wooden beam that had taken 2 of them before now yielded with a single arm. The barn door gaped ajar, and Marco stepped into the bitter cold gaze of the full moon. His fingers adjusting his grip on the gladius, and he took 15 quiet paces and stopped. His head twisted back one final time, indicating for the two to bar the door once more. As Remus pulled the door shut, the moonlight shone upon his face through the breached door. The light suddenly flashed, and a deep, reverberative growling sound and the smell of putrefying blood filled the area. The sound of a sword blade slashing through the frost-laden breeze of the autumn air. Marco's face was hard and expressionless. The wolf stood between him and the large red doors of the barn. Its piercing gaze was fixed on him, as it lowered its body as it was ready to pounce. Marco was steady. His fingers flickered with static. His body turned to face the creature sideways, and with a flick, the gladius was raised, and Marco assumed a fighting position. The beast gave a wicked smile, and as if in a flash of a shadow, it lunged forward, claws extended towards Marco. As if a natural reaction, he dived aside, rolled, and in a crouched position, he twisted and resumed his defensive stance. But the wolf was already mid-leap again, and he reacted as best he could. Rolling forward with the gladius in both hands, he slipped underneath the soaring beast and cut his chest with the tip of the blade. He rose, this time much faster, and began to sprint towards the barn. The beast was only 5 paces behind. He reached the door and leapt 1, 2 steps. He ran up to the shredded door, span and swung with all of his might. The creature howled as with blade was met with a resistance of the werewolf's muzzle. Marco landed behind the beast, but was in shock as the wolf was seemingly unscathed. Marco remembered his silver dagger. He threw the gladius at the towering monstrosity. His aim wasn't perfect, but Marco wasn't bothered. He sprinted towards the monster, his dagger now drawn. But the beast, it was fast. Too fast. It slipped past the hurtling sword and head-butted the 16-year-old with a spine-breaking hit. Marco fell when the beast fell upon him. He desperately thrust the dagger, but the wolf pinned his arm with one of its malformed hands. Saliva dripped on his face as the hot stamp from the monster's breath bellowed out across his face. Marco almost gagged under the stench, but then instead of tearing him to pieces, as he was sure would happen, the voice in his head began once more.
"You fool! I shall now satisfy my hunger, my desire."
As from nowhere, a pitchfork speared the wolf, and on the end of the handle, Cecilia. In a split second, Marco's free hand snatched at his pocket, pulling a silver brooch pin, and with a fast, violent thrust, he stabbed the beast in the chest. The monster lifted and squealed. It swiped the leg of the dainty girl with its claw, and she screamed and let go of the fork. And Remus, with the gladius in his hand, swung the blade with utter fury. The clawed hand went soaring into the air. Marco, with his dagger arm now free, thrusted the dagger, the silver stake entering through the bottom of the wolf's jaw. And it bellowed with agony. The remaining clawed hand desperately tried to remove the silver that was melting its flesh. Marco gave one last scream of defiance, and with the electric surging in his fist, he struck the handle of the dagger, forcing the tip to burst through the werewolf's cranial, and with a spurt of steaming blood. The wolf went quiet and slumped to the side, its hair falling off as it began to spasm and shrank into a small, feral-looking woman.
"Marco!"
The girl fell to her knees. Her hand was pressing against a finger-length wound on her thigh. I'm fine. Let's look at that leg. It's not too deep. You'll be okay. Remus, give me a hand with this. Remus took a knee beside them, tore his sleeve and dressed her leg. He looked across at his older cousin. So, that thing 6 years ago? Yes, it was that thing that killed them. And what now? Remus's eyes didn't swell as Marco expected. He simply waited for a response. Let's get her inside the house. When dawn breaks, I'll pack what I need. Clothes, food, valuables. I can't stay, Remus. I need to go. Go where? What will you do? Go back home? I don't know. But I know now what I need to do. You and Cecilia go to the miller and his wife. They will help you. I'm going to take one of the horses. Where will you go? They both asked in unison. To Ruggervern. Maybe further. I'm going to join the guild. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Had to bring this one back. It's certainly one of the best exclusive stories for the channel. From a good friend, Mr. S. Binx. And this was back in 2018 when I first dropped this one. Back when we had a bad mic and a dodgy style. As you guys can probably tell, I'm sounding a lot better and back to my old self. Feeling great, feeling positive and full of energy. Fire back in my stomach. Gonna start dropping bombs left, right and centre for you guys, subscribers and members alike. I hope you enjoyed that one as much as us. Of course, as ever though, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you think you got the minerals to pen the next big hit, then why not get in touch with me at the brand new contact email, which is, as on screen, contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. A huge thank you guys for your continued support. Time to get this show back on the road and smash our way through that 50k mark before the end of the year. As ever, I hope you're all well and happy and taking a fight back to life. But above all guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.